Betty and I are honored and humbled that we have been making a living doing this for as long as we have, really. It's been 40 years that we have been our own bosses, and we're doing things that we don't lose sleep at night once over the quality of what we do or the nature of what we do. So we're blessed that way. But even if you were, an accountant for a big city company, but you could grow shiitakes like nothing, embrace that creative side of you and share it as best you can on whatever level you can.
Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon. Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon.
Welcome to With Bowl and Spoon. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself?
I am Betty Ferderber
And I'm T.Lyle Ferderber.
of Frankferd Farms.
And Frankferd Farms Milling.
You guys are great. This is awesome. So what is Frankferd Farms and Frankferd Farms Milling?
Well, the short story is that we started milling when our son was born. That was 46 years ago. And after a number of years of growing our flour mill, we lost our biggest customer and kind of took the customer list and the supplier list from an old natural food warehouse collective in Pittsburgh and tried to do it on our own. And that became Frankferd Farms Foods. That's the short story.
And Betty, I wanted to have you here because I know T-Lyle gets to talk all the time about stuff. I've heard him talk a lot. I want to hear it. So do you agree with his side of the story?
I do agree with this side of the story. Yes. We moved to the farm. We had we were very young, 19. T-Lyle had lived here his whole life. I moved here when I was 19 and pregnant. And we needed to figure out what we were going to do with this place, this farm. And
How to make a living.
Yeah, how to make a living. We both had jobs off of the farm, menial jobs. And yes, we that is how this came about. Because we had a farm and we loved pancakes. And we grew buckwheat. That was our first crop, so that we could make a buckwheat pancake mix because we just ate a lot of pancakes. And that was the beginning of our flour mill, which was the first thing we did on the farm. In addition to growing, we custom grew vegetables for several people who were on Gerson's therapy.
Yeah, the Gerson therapy.
And that actually truly sustained us. I mean, selling bags of vegetables that we grew in the garden, worked really hard at that. Boarding horses in the barn, that helped us to pay for, because at the time we had not purchased the farm, we were renting it. And we also had housemates. We did everything we could to be able to afford to live here at the time because we were young, idealistic hippies that just wanted to have a farm.
And we were poor.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you talk about here, this is an old farmhouse from the 1800s?
Yeah, that was one of the first 4 plots of land that was settled in this township. And it's a depreciation land that was given to Revolutionary War soldiers as payment for their service. My dad bought it before I was born in 1955 and moved from the city out to here, kept the farm going kind of large scale, hired people to live here. There was a little travel trailer in our backyard where a couple would live and did a lot of the farm work. So I was raised, as a son of a city person on a farm from day one. When Betty and I first got together, some of the things that we did together were like garden and then freeze and can. That's, we knew how to have a good time.
So how did you guys meet?
High school. School.
Oh, okay.
We went to school together. I grew up nearby in the town of Mars. We both went to the Mars school district. And yes, we were classmates. So we started to date in 10th grade, I think. 10th grade, first date was the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon concert where they opened the lid on the roof on the Civic Arena. And then I'm at a certain point after high school. We both went off to college for a year. T.Lyle went to Hampshire College in Massachusetts, and I went to Penn State. And well, we both had reasons for not staying at college. T.Lyle was studying. He wanted to learn to translate Sanskrit, and the professor that he was studying under was going on sabbatical, and I was at Penn State to be a horticulture major, and I was kind of disillusioned and thought it was just as easy to go work and learn this as it was to pay, and we really missed each other. So we moved back here together when T.Lyle's parents retired to Florida, and they gave us what used to be a pig barn in the barnyard to live in, which was a very small barn, no bathroom or anything. We had an outside toilet, and we built an outside shower stall, and we lived in this one room pig barn. And we did that until it got too cold, and then we left and went to Arizona because it had no heat and we didn't have a bathroom or anything. T.Lyle's parents ended up renting out the house to another family who, actually, it started out being a family. The family didn't work out. So a woman moved into the farmhouse while we were living in the pig barn who had an ashram here. She had a spiritual community. She was one of the first people commissioned by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to teach transcendental meditation. So I mean, we had the coolest neighbors in the world. We were vegetarian and hippies. This house all of a sudden was full of vegetarian hippies, and she had seminars, and she was a super cool lady. So we left, went to Arizona.
Where your sisters had
where
moved
my
to
sisters moved.
as nursing grads of Penn State.
Yes.
They'd moved there and stayed there.
Right. They loved it there. And we moved out there not knowing if we would come back or not. And after a year of the teacher being here in the farmhouse, she decided she wanted to move all of her followers to California. And so all of a sudden, the farmhouse was available for rent.
One of the critical things that happened in Arizona, though, was that when we met up with Betty's sisters, they were nursing professionals, but they bought food from a local co-op store, and they bought food from the Tucson Cooperative Warehouse, which delivered buying club orders to people in town and out in the countryside. And we joined one of their buying club groups, and it was like, wow, this is a whole new economy, a whole new way of, but for us, it was a whole new way of eating. It was also a whole new way of buying food and of course, preparing it. And so, that stuck with us, and we plugged into that. When we came back, when the farmhouse was available for us to rent, we looked for something like that in Pittsburgh, and lo and behold, there was a small cooperative warehouse behind the East End Co-op.
The way old East
End.
The
way old, yes.
The one that was by Babyland.
On Penn Avenue in East Liberty.
Wow, I forgot about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the back part of it was a warehouse that supplied East End Food Co-op, the storefront, in addition to selling to food buying clubs.
And other co-op stores that were just starting
like Semple Street.
Maybe there was an Erie Co-op. There might have been Mountain People's in Morgantown. So we came back and immediately started buying food from this place. We moved back because the farm was available. But us learning about the natural foods world really is what we learned about from a buying perspective out there. And coming back here, it was like, well, we got to find that. And then we heard of Walnut Acres. And so our growth, our interest in what we do now started really, in a sense, in Arizona as a result of being exposed to that, different kinds of foods and different ways of buying it. And we brought that idea back with us, plugged into what was like that going on here then versus consumers.
Buying club.
We had a food buying club. Yeah,
what do they call it? Rio Salada?
That was the one. That was the one in, I think it was Rio Salada out in Arizona. I forget what we called.
What was the one?
Well, Ben and Kathy had one called Speed the Plow. That's an old traditional song.
That's right.
And so we set up a buying club in Pittsburgh with Pittsburgh friends. We set up a buying club out here with farm friends.
Yeah.
And then that really helped grow our tiny little flour mill business, because we could raise wheat, buckwheat, and corn, but there's so many other things that you can make flour out of. And this food warehouse in Pittsburgh, all of a sudden we realized wow, could you guys buy like a pallet of something for us? We'll buy it from you, give us a deal. We'll bring it back next week in the form of flour. And so we began doing that. And our symbiotic relationship with the first called Consumer Co-ops of Pittsburgh, CCP, began that way. We would go in and bulk buy from them for our flour mill, as well as food for ourselves. And then we were able to mill those things, and our price list and our offerings grew, and our business grew as a result.
And that coincided, the milling business coincided with the birth of our son.
Here at home, with Betty's sister as the midwife.
Oh, wow. So you gave birth here in this house.
Yes.
Both
Twice.
kids, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. For our 2 kids.
Very fortunate
Yes.
that it worked out. But my sister is a certified nurse midwife. At the time, she was a lay midwife and a nurse. So I was her first solo birth.
Oh, wow.
And Jeremy's due date, he was at the very end of his due date, and she was set to fly back to Arizona, because she lived in Arizona, the following day after he was born. So I was very nervous. I had no I was I can't believe the nerve that I had to do some of the things they did when I was younger. But yeah, it worked out. We had a good home birth, and that's when the flour mill was born, so that you could be at home more too. We both quit our outside jobs. I had already been real pregnant, and we just concentrated on what we could do here to make money and to be able to afford to live here.
And the flour mill is on the property?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in
Okay.
the building right next to the house. And
I haven't ever toured the
well,
the
it's
mill or anything.
not a
so-
big deal, but it has been there for 40 some years now. The first mill was in the house.
Yeah,
Because
in the
we weren't
room
committed
they're
to
remodeling right now.
Yeah, right. We had a hammer mill,
There was
and it's
probably
about this
flour in
big,
our
this wide.
walls.
Yeah, about this tall, and I would mill at night. Our son was young, and and we did have other jobs at the time, so we would do our shifts at wherever else we were working, and we'd come home and would mill flour at night and package it at night, and when the baby would go to bed, we were there stitching up bags and labeling them, and then once it really began to take off, we cleared a building out. Because again, we were just renting here. This was not our place at all. It was just a place that we were paying my parents rent money. But then when things expanded,
The free place was the pig barn.
the pig barn. Yeah, that was the free place. Yes. Right.
Now, when I say it was a pig barn, it was originally a pig barn. When T.Lyle's mother, when they lived here, she had refinished it. She put an inside roof in it.
And insulation and drywall.
And insulation.
and a little space
And she
heater.
made it a little craft store that you could only stand up in the center of.
Oh, wow.
Right. But she did. She had local people, macrame artists, if you remember macrame, but potters and craftspeople that would bring stuff on consignment. And she was only open on weekends, so she had little signs on the bottom of the driveway. So it was a finished barn.
Cousins, it was called. My Country Cousins.
So when we moved in there and the craft stuff was given back to the people that didn't sell, we at least had insulation and drywall.
And that's good.
So you go to Arizona, then you come back and you decide to grow buckwheat and mill it for pancakes.
Right. And that was not enough to be able to afford to live here still, so we added boarding horses, and we constantly had rooms that we rented out in our house to other people.
Yeah, we basically started Airbnbs ourselves. You know?
We had a lot of roommates.
We had roommates, yes. Yeah. And that paid the bills, and so we paid bills. And interesting thing about that, too, was it taught us, we had the opportunity to learn how to get along with people. When they're your roommates, but you own the place, there were certain dynamics there. But we had a long string of roommates, and we had a long stream of horse boarders.
And they're all still good friends, actually.
Yes, right.
Oh, that's
right.
good.
We've lost
They
none of them
all-
as friends, right?
Good that worked out.
Yeah.
So at the same time, though, you're growing the milling company.
Right.
And then adding other things on?
Both of our inspirations was Walnut Acres, and they were started by a couple of intellectual city refugees that bought land, moved to the country, were inspired to raise their own food. When they would make their food and share it with neighbors and friends, people said, well, you ought to sell this. I think their first thing that they made was apple butter, and they had a friend who was a New York Times food editor, and that person said, this is the finest apple butter I've ever eaten in my life. That propelled them to put in a cannery. Then they baked bread, they baked granola, they raised other crops that they canned. We saw that when we were young adults and went, wow, you can start with a farm and you can start to make things and then you can value add to them and you can build a business from there. And I know that was Betty's and my inspiration early on. As homesteaders, We saw Walnut Acres as people that started out as homesteaders and graduated into business people in selling organic and natural foods. It's interesting for you to say, tell me about Walnut Acres, because that was an incredible milestone, not just for us personally, but it was a milestone in the development of the entire organic food industry. They were some of the first people in the country to do that, and they were a model for so many businesses that are now large that came after that. And so it was just one of the steps in the development of this business that we're in. And you go into a grocery store, you ask people in the grocery business, what's growing in your industry? They go, well, organic foods is growing, not much else, but So that was an important milestone and inspiration to the early people in the 70s, say it's late 60s, early 70s, that wanted to take organic farming, add value to their products, and become food producers on a commercial scale. I remember walking in their fields and the soil was soft and loamy. We went up as a part of an organic growers group that we created from scratch because we wanted to write standards. As all this was happening across the country, in the 70s, we all looked at each other that all met at a fertilizer salesman. Yes, there was an organic fertilizer salesman that we met in the late 70s and early 80s. The Kretschmans, we met the Kretschmans there. We created an organic growers group to create rules and guidelines. And so that, we were starting to go to farm markets, put a sign up that said, we're organic. And people go, well, what does that mean? Well, here's our list of standards. And we also shared it amongst ourselves so that other people that claimed that in our neck of the woods would have this put in their face and said, oh, do you follow these standards? These are ours. You can join us if you can follow it. We actually then did what Certified Naturally Grown does today, which is another organization. We did peer-to-peer inspections. So that would mean like you and I would go visit Betty's farm and inspect it. Then Betty and you would come and visit my farm and inspect me, et cetera, et cetera. So we did that as an early growers group. And then when we found out that there was organizations that did this and we wouldn't have to do all that paperwork, we joined. But we took our group of people up and went to Walnut Acres. And we were it was like, if we can do a tenth of what these people have done, we'll satisfy our souls. Walking through there, they had big stainless steel vats of sauerkraut. Their bakery, the smell, the bread, the granola. And then walking through the fields, we farmers walked through the fields and said, this soil is soft, it's spongy. Oh my goodness, this is the way it's supposed to be done. And so really that inspired us more sometimes than I realize. And that was an important part of our looking to find a way to add value to the things that we were doing here, which is we grew a few grains. We got a flour mill. And that's how we began to add value to, and create a business that was based not just on raw materials, but on value-added stuff. And Betty was on the trip with us. It was, I don't know, there were about a dozen of us or maybe 9 or 10 of us. And we removed, every one of us, from whatever, as fledgling flour millers who were like, wow, they have a real flour mill. This is, bigger and better than ours. And farmers going, this soil was good. And other people just noting how they had done all that in a really professional and wholesome and sound organic way.
Are they still around?
No. Sadly, every business that goes more than 10 or 20 years that transitions to someone else being in charge is going to deal with this. We're starting to deal with that now.
The legacy. Yeah.
The legacy or lack or direction change, these are all issues. And one of their daughters, the Keen's daughters, married somebody, and he kind of took over as general manager at a time when the industry was expanding, that they were facing competition, and perhaps he or they did not find their niches well. And as a result, they began to either shrink or be challenged by competition. Everybody has to deal with that. But he ended up selling the business out. Many people that were affiliated with the business that we dealt with, because we were buying products from them. I think we bought nut butters, granolas, some canned goods from them, and they sold for us well. We would talk to the people there that made it, not the management, but we talked to the people that made it, and they said, we work hard all day long. We ship this stuff out. Something happened at the top. It wasn't us not having work, and it wasn't us not selling stuff. But the end result was they closed the place up completely. They sold the name to somebody who, there may still be some products that say Walnut Acres on them with really no connection to the original place. And I think that the original farm, or some of it, stayed in the family, and there's a foundation that now supports farming, homesteading, and organic agriculture education, but that's what's left of it. And that's what happens when generations transition, when management changes. Not necessarily a happy ending story. We had about a 7-year period where the flour mill and horse boarding and selling out of our garden to
And
specific
selling
people.
hay.
And selling hay. Yeah, we
What-
still say
yeah,
hay,
we
sell
still
hay to this
sell-
day.
yeah.
So you're doing the farmer hustle.
Yes,
essentially.
right.
Gotcha.
Whatever, everything we could, growing stuff in the garden, selling them to these people on special diets. And that worked until the person that bought 90% of our flour was that, well, they had changed names at this point. It had started out being CCP, Behind East End Food Co-op. They had a falling out with East End and the board there, and the workers moved off and formed Infinity Foods. And that was in the Strip District. And they were all friends of ours. They had all been formerly the CCP people.
And they couldn't get along with the board at East End, who was telling them, have really low minimums for delivery. And they said, but we're not making money. We need to raise our minimums. We need to do some things.
So they broke away and they moved into the Strip District, and they became pretty much our only customer because they distributed our flour everywhere. And so each week it was getting their orders, us grinding all the flour, bagging all the flour, getting it into them 1 or 2 days a week. And that worked out well for several years until they went bankrupt. Infinity Foods went bankrupt. And when they declared bankruptcy, we had no more flour business. And so at that point, I was pregnant with our second child. And T.Lyle's mother had just moved up here because T.Lyle's father had been murdered. They had moved to Florida. And her husband, T.Lyle's father, was murdered in their home when she was not home. And she was, needless to say, depressed, despondent, didn't want to be there anymore. It was it was a mass murderer who ended up killing 2 people in this town, just basically randomly, you know.
But all over, he killed in 6 states.
Yes.
Serial killer.
Yes.
Serial killer, yes.
So Rita, T.Lyle's mother, who had retired to Florida, basically, she was doing some pharmacy. She was a pharmacist. She moved back up here to be with us and to be surrounded, you know, it was terrible to be there for her anymore. And at that time, I was pregnant. Infinity Foods went under, and the folks at Infinity said, we will give you our mailing list, and you can try to sell directly to all of these people, and we will sell you a lot. They felt very bad. They'd become good friends, and they didn't rip us off. We were paid in full. We were very fortunate that way. But we bought like 10 cases of noodles and
10 cases of yellow corn chips, 10 bags of pinto beans.
And some peanut butter, 9-pound tubs of peanut butter.
Yes.
And we brought them out and put them into what used to be a living room right there.
In little stacks and little aisles, and
thought,
people would walk
okay,
up and, yeah.
So that it's worth it for us to deliver our flour somewhere, we'll sell all of these other things too. And that's where it started.
So it was a really shitty year, and then you bought a lot of food and started your own.
We each put, T.Lyle's mother,
Yeah.
T.Lyle and I each put
$600 or $700 on the table, and so let's try to make this
business to buy the initial inventory.
Right.
And we delivered orders in our cars. People
it-
came here to look at our warehouse.
to walk up and down a one-room
In here.
storehouse. Yeah, right in here.
In our living
Yes.
room.
Up and down these are the three stacks of beans we have, the 2 stacks of corn
Yeah.
chips, the 4 stacks of pastas we have, the 2 kinds of oil we have, and the 10 peanut butters we have. Well, I have to say something. My mother actually gave up her pharmaceutical license because she was afraid in her sadness. She could not live with herself if she made a mistake. And so she moved up here and was really, truly sad and despondent. But as soon as we looked at each other, and, Betty's 7.5 months pregnant with Tara, and Betty was less involved with the decision to do this because she said, my job 1 is this, pointing
Yep.
to her belly. My mother's life changed. She became happy. It was the best thing that happened to her in her adult life. And I'll get a little weepy about it, but it's because here she was, she came home and found her husband, my father, dead. And this was a new chapter in her life. And she would deliver orders to like Nature's Way in Greensburg in her station wagon. So here was this, 50-some, 60-some-year-old woman wheeling stuff in on a dolly to stores, but with a smile on her face and with purpose in her life.
Yeah.
And so we were actually a 3-way partnership for a number of years until she met an old friend from high school, and then they started to date. She moved out of here, bought a home in Pittsburgh, and even then we incorporated that into the business. There was a bakery in Pittsburgh called Simple Treat Bakery, and it lasted for years through several iterations. Fran would always bring over the Sunday bread order, and every Sunday we would go in, and by then our daughter was born, and she was 3 or 4 years old, and it was always a special thing. We always had Sunday dinner. We always picked up a boatload of racks of bread, of fresh bread that was going to go into the truck Monday, baked Sunday night. We'd have dinner with our mother, and she would come back out to work the next day. She would drive from Pittsburgh out and come to work. We eventually bought her out of her share of the business, and she moved in and got remarried. But in the beginning, we were a three-way partnership, and it was the thing that it saved her, I think, in many ways. And she was as happy as I'd ever seen her in my life, because she was working with young people. She was doing something that she knew was good, and she loved to cook. And she would, recipe, sure, give me, cookbooks, sure. Let's try new things. Let's cook these foods. Let's try this out. And it was a really good family thing, because then in some ways we had 3 generations in the business right there. My mother, Betty, and I, and then our kids who were, our son was shoveling manure and stamping flour bags and helping me at the mill and things like that. So it was a quintessential multi-generational home and business, and it was good. It really was. And, as we grew, this room that we're seated in became the office, and we had, 4 phone lines coming into here. And I think a couple of things that led up to us.
And for those younger listeners, sorry, this was pre-internet.
Oh, right. Everything's done. We had a method of shorthand.
Actually pick up a phone that was wired to a wall.
Yes. We had shorthand. So if somebody was ordering 2 5s of whole wheat bread flour, we would write 2 5 WWB and then fill the rest of the word in. If they were getting crunchy, organic, no salt peanut butter, we would write, 1 CRNSOPN and then fill the words in on carbonless copy paper. 1 copy went to the warehouse. 1 copy would be used to adjust the bill when the order when it came back. We were reprinting catalogs on a weekly basis. Oh, the price of peanut butter went up. The price of almonds went down. We'd reprint page 4 of our price list, and we would copy the prices over. And we did that like in this room. But the business got bigger. We filled both stories of the building that still had the flour mill in it. We'd be milling flour while we were pulling orders. We stacked 2 tractor trailers in the yard that we rented to fill with space. And I think it was when somebody changed a really stinky poopy diaper in our, a customer was in here paying the bill. They said, "Oh, I need to change my kid's diaper," and they went into the next room and did that. And then one day, Betty and I were trying to hide out from our employees and our customers in the barn next to a very dirty stall that needed cleaned. And a grocery store owner stepped through the manure to come and talk to us because he was told that we were up in the barn somewhere. We looked at each other. We looked at each other and said, "Something's got to give. We've got to move." And then the whole story of us buying our place, we had put our name on a piece of ground that the owner of the ground, who had 1 piece of ground owned by PennDOT in the middle of it, he couldn't come to terms with them. And for 1 year, we just called him monthly. Can we get the land now? He said, "No, PennDOT will not concede to changing the entrance to their property, and they are within our property, so we can't ignore them." We eventually went door to door, started knocking on doors to find a place to buy. And we know that we understand this look. We went next door to what is next door to where our business is now, knocked on the door there, and they were manufacturing. It was an office with a factory next to it. And we knocked on the door, and we were farmers and homesteaders, and we looked the part. And we knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we're interested if you'd like to sell any land." And we got that look that when somebody looks you up and down, kind of sniffs in distaste and says, "No, thank you. I have nothing to talk to you about." We knew the look. We went to our bank. We're now 7 or 8 or 9 years old, profitable, business growing, lots of tax records. The bank said, "Well, we'll write you a note for, I don't know, maybe $100,000 line of credit. Take that back." We went back the next day. The guy said, "Well, you guys, what are you doing here?" We said, "Here, please read the note." And it was from our bank. It said, "We're giving these people a 6-figure line of credit to buy some land. Just know that they are in good stead with our bank and that they are a viable business." And that door opened right up, and we walked right in there and bought that land.
Cool.
Only to find out that the land, unbeknownst to us, was up for sheriff's sale. The lawyer who researches the title, if you're going to buy a home, if you're going to buy industrial or commercial ground, there's an assumption that it's offered for sale, that there's really not an encumbrance on it. That's an assumption, and perhaps research should have been done.
Absolutely.
But at 5 minutes to 5, our lawyer said this deal is not happening today because that land is scheduled for sheriff's sale in 6 weeks. So the tens of thousands of dollars that you paid out of your wallet, because the company was bankrupt that we were buying it from, the tens of thousands of dollars you paid out for land surveying, subdivision plan, and environmental impact researched on the property is going to go down the tubes when this is sold to the highest bidder in 6 weeks. So that we went back to the owners, so we were facing them at the table where we were supposed to be signing documents, and said, you will get that money because we don't want to lose the $30,000 we'd put down to pay for all those things. And you're going to find that money and pay for it so you can sell us this property. And within a week of those 6 weeks, they fulfilled their tax obligation, so the sheriff's sale didn't occur. And then we were the owners of the property, and then we could proceed with the building and creating the business, the building that's there now. But that was just a little bump of the road. We got our building, we were able to move over there, and one of the shocking things was when we worked here, and if we were to walk through the building, the flour mill, I could show you where there's remnants of the pallet racks that we had made. And these pallet racks, we didn't want to buy them. Of course we could make them. So we stood pallets up vertical. Then we laid 2x4s on top of them, and then we laid pallets on top of that. So now we had a pallet racking system. And so we had goods on the floor, and then we had goods above that. And then against the walls, we would put a ledger plate and put pallets. And so then we had shelves along the walls. We were so efficient in pulling orders because you could pull an order in an area that was the size of this, room, maybe 1,000 square feet or less. You could pull everything that you needed to pull, and so you didn't have to wander very far to find it. It was sometimes a ladder. And then when we moved to the business and put real pallet racking in, we had loading docks, and we had electric pallet jacks, and all these things. Our staff didn't know how to handle it, and we had a rude awakening when we didn't make money at first, and the efficiency, what we were paying our staff to do the same amount of work with modern tools, went way down. And we had to kind of look real hard at what we had to do to make things work in an efficient way in a large space, large to us, when we had come from a very small space. And we did, but that was one of those little face slaps. Like, wait, we lost money? How? Everything should be easier.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But
it's like growing pains, but you'd think
Yeah.
that would be
we
opposite,
wouldn't have thought that was a growing pain. There would have been others. We knew we'd already experienced some of them, but we didn't think that would be. But it's we learned to do it better and righter and get the right tools, at least rudimentarily, to get the job done more efficiently. And we learned that. But that was another stumbling block along the way. But everybody would be rich from their business if they didn't have those stumbling blocks and didn't figure out a way to get through them.
Betty isn't here to ask, but how did you end up being a crunchy vegetarian hippie guy?
Oh, that's a wonderful story, and Betty will roll her eyes, and it's really totally true. Betty went and visited her sisters. In my speech, I said she discovered granola food buying clubs in Carlos Castaneda when she went to Arizona. But
This was before you guys went out there together.
This is before we went out together. But they were eating really crunchy food. They were eating brown rice and beans and what we eat today. But that was new. Now,
I guess today it would be called clean food.
Yes, right. Good food. Now, both of our parents were from the World War II and the Depression generation. So they both understood the value of food. They both understood the value of cooking it yourself, of being frugal, of being conservative and conscientious in what you buy, how you use it, not wasting and things like that. And we were big-scale gardeners. My mom taught me how to can and freeze and then taught Betty. So we were eating good food, but this was different food. So Betty came back and kind of said, I'm a vegetarian. I'm not eating any meat anymore. And I ate lots of meat, but along with all the vegetables that we canned and raised ourselves. There was something said about no kissing me unless you're a vegetarian. I'd love to hear Betty's take on that, but that's the story I tell, and I'm sticking to it. And I've been pretty much, other than eating some seafood occasionally, been a vegetarian since then, since I was 18. Betty became a vegetarian when she was 16. And it was just, she was following her sisters, but also understood the impact of killing an animal. I understood that because I was a fisherman, and I could catch and kill a fish and fillet it. And once we began to understand that and look at it, it's not that we didn't want to eat meat, but we weren't going to eat it if we couldn't kill it. And that made us that we became vegetarians. We don't have to kill food to eat food, and we don't want to do it. Maybe morally we didn't feel superior enough to the animals to kill them, to eat them. But that's when we became, vegetarians, and that hasn't changed in 48 years.
Oh, you became a vegetarian for a girl.
Yes, I did.
That simple.
Yes, I did. It was that simple.
There's no philosophy or any of that. You can wax poetic all you want.
Not for me, maybe. Betty had the philosophy.
She had the philosophy, and you're just like,
I want to kiss her. I can't eat any meat. Okay, we'll eat some other food, and it worked. Our 47th anniversary will be in a couple months, so it set us off on learning to cook all the foods that we became interested in, and many of it was ethnic. And when we were young, and we didn't take our family and travel places, we couldn't afford that, but we drove, we couldn't fly, but we would take our kids to as many ethnic restaurants as we could and learn a little bit about the food, where it came from, how it's prepared there as we would eat these foods. And so our kids were raised that way, knowing that the world of food is wide and delicious and broad and interesting. And that's something that both of our kids to this day are really good cooks and love to cook. And I'm certain that was developed by Betty and I, enjoying cooking, but enjoying variety and enjoying learning about new foods. And whether it was Japanese, Mexican, Italian, or Middle Eastern foods, these are the foods that we ate as vegetarians that opened our eyes to all those kinds of ethnic cuisines.
Yeah, tell me about one of those experiences. Is there anything that's memorable? Any experience that stands out?
I just remember when, even before we had the food business, and when I would go take my weekly or bi-weekly flower runs in, I would often stop at what was the old Palmyra or Sahara restaurants. Both of them were on Atwood Street. One of them became the first Mad Mex. So we're talking 40 years ago. But I would get takeout food and bring it home. Oh, baba ganoush, hummus. This is how people that live there and know how to make it and taste it. Okay, so we're going to try it. We're going to raise some eggplant, or we're going to get a jar of tahini from the food warehouse that we sold to and try to make it ourselves. And so it was often getting takeout food from places like that and bringing it home and then trying to mimic it and getting a recipe for it. Our Moosewood cookbooks are well thumbed. And there's a number of really old cookbooks in there. Betty has a preserving cookbook that she uses. It's some old, I don't know if it was Mennonite or Seventh-day Adventist books. These are some of the things that we read when we were, in our late teens and early 20s that became kind of guidebooks for food preservation and good, clean, simple food.
Yeah, as you're saying this, I'm like, yep, that's hippies. That's the whole, trajectory of the health food. And
This is the mid-'70s to the late 70s, and we were high school graduates in 75, so everything we're talking about happens late 70s, early 80s. And that's really when the organic and natural food industry exploded.
Yeah.
And like in my talk, I said, the USDA started studying it, saying we're having conventional agriculture problems, and we have these people that stand up and want to be heard saying we have some solutions, or we can do things differently, that it's clean and it works. Look at our farms. As that grew, it got big. It needed to get big. There's many compromises that come with getting big. Many things I talked about: consolidation, weakening of standards, the actual writing of standards. But the industry, there was no turning back. It was becoming an industry. It was becoming a way of life. It was becoming a way of farming, and it moved itself through the food chain so that there were more vine clubs, natural food markets, farm markets, natural food stores, or sections in traditional stores that address those, that growing consumer demand for it. So you'd have a farm market would have a natural section, or a grocery store that had a natural section. And food co-ops really blossomed during that. Of course, then they had to face the onslaught from Whole Foods, but that was their heyday. That was when they were a dependable and growing place to find a really rich variety of good stuff.
It's really interesting the changes that have happened in the last 20 years.
Yeah. 20 years have been rough. Our early days were our best days because we were doing things that nobody else had done. Once everybody caught up to it, now we have to fight for our market share. We have to fight to get people to notice us or remember us or hear about us. And it's different. And the problems that beset any industry, consolidation, weakening of quality, are the same things that we have to deal with in our world. In the whole history of writing the organic food law, the original part of the food law, the law was passed in 1990, but it did not get enacted till the end of the last day of 2000. So it really went into effect 2001. Why did it take 11 years to take a rule that was just there will be a national food law, national organic food law? How did it, what happened in those 11 years? And that was the USDA packed the board that wrote the rules with industry, conventional agricultural industry people, and ignored the advice of this growing industry. We've got the board that wrote the rules was comprised of farmers, processors, scientists, maybe a lawyer, and maybe some citizen activists. And we had plenty for them to pull from. We submitted that information to them. They ignored it and pulled in people from ADM and Monsanto and Cargill and companies like that. And, the history of organic food people, whether consumers, processors, or farmers, fighting with the USDA to get the respect that they deserved is really big. And the USDA was not a controversial agency. It was not an agency that was used to bad public relations or used to being challenged. And we basically shut that place down. The straw that broke the USDA's back was when the board, mostly comprised with non-organic people, put out for public comment the fact that maybe we would consider using sewage sludge on land, we would use irradiated foods, and we would find maybe a way to get GMOs to be acceptable in the organic food world. And basically the organic food world, starting with consumers, shut down the USDA. And those early days of the internet, they could not handle the mail, they could not handle the phone calls, they could not handle the internet messages they were getting, and they were getting really bad publicity. These are some of the challenges that were overcome to get a food law that was written that was, I think, for the most part, as good, if not better, than the organic standards that were being applied in various regional agencies. So the way it worked before there was a national food law, you would find an agency such as OCIA, Organic Crop Improvement Association, PCO, Pennsylvania Certified Organic, and you would have them inspect your farm by their standards and give you their trademark seal to use on your products. When Europe became interested, when California wanted to buy New York product and vice versa, there was a lack of standardization between these regional agencies that were good functioning agencies, but they couldn't quite come to agreement with other people. And it was a Western Pennsylvania farmer. We had started, Betty and I had started with our local farmers a chapter of OCIA. It was Pennsylvania number 2. First one was in the East. We were the second chapter. And a farmer that we had, Ron Gargas, who was a beef and grain farmer from Volant, he ended up finding a way of getting us to spend our hard-earned money on sending him to the international meetings, which were international. They weren't America. So we would pay his plane flight and his hotel for him to go to these international meetings. The end result of that was he was a very smart man. He knew organic agriculture. He became OCIA's president. So at the natural food trade shows that were held in Baltimore for the most part, for the East Coast, both the distributors would get together and talk shop, but the organic agencies would get together and talk. And Ron helped both with the beginning of the international Independent Organic Inspection Agency, because these agencies would hire an independent person to come, ask you all the tough questions, turn the paperwork in for you to be reviewed. But these were professional people that had to know what to ask, had to know what to look for. So Ron helped form that organization as president of OCIA, international president of OCIA. Thank goodness we bankrolled him for that. And also, he helped start the move towards getting the organic food law standardized, and it was the suggestion was made when the agencies couldn't get together and say, my Chilean nitrate's allowed by my farmers, it won't hurt anything. Well, no, we don't allow Chilean nitrate because it kills earthworms. Those are the kinds of arguments where two agencies, well, your standards aren't the same as mine, and that's how it went. And those various agencies finally turned to the USDA, who passed the rule during Democratic presidents. After
11 years.
After 11 years, the law was fleshed out, and the laws are reviewed every year and renewed every year. There's new things. Hydroponics is yet to become an organic thing. But since 2005, a few years after the law actually went into effect, there's been a committee studying how the ruling says the words are soil, and there's not soil in hydroponics, therefore it's not organic yet. There are constant changes. There's constant requests to diminish, weaken, and dilute, and there has to be continued oversight, continued follow-through on the part of organic consumers and organic agencies to monitor that and to keep it as good as it can be instead of allowing it to weaken here and weaken there. Because what happens, the Cornucopia Institute became a watchdog agency. They sued the Aurora Dairy Farm, I believe in Colorado, that was quote-unquote organic certified. They must have treated that inspector and that agency really well. But again, the rules for animals were hazy. The rules for straight-up crops were pretty distinct. Processing, that's where some of the weakening happened. Ascorbic acid was allowed, and the original people that wanted to have the law did not want ascorbic acid or citric acid used. They didn't want anything like that, but those were standard things that you would use when you would process tomatoes or apples and things like that. They got into the organic food law. But, animals must have access to pasture. Well, a 20,000 cow dairy farm meant that was access to a little dirt patch that one at a time they could go into. And that was
sad.
Horizon Dairy was getting their milk. A lot of your private label milk was made at this organic dairy. So Cornucopia Institute would constantly sue them and force them to follow the standards, as the standards were for animal husbandry were raised and made better and made more detailed and really truly made more strict as the years went by. But that's just one little example of how you write a law and people try to change it one way, and then if you're the people that help write the law, you have to even make it better if you can. And that's a good. There was a whole course of 10 or 20 years of that, of making the animal husbandry laws more distinct, more clear, and better for animals that are being used for milk or eggs or for meat.
So while you guys are growing your business, you've got this activist side happening as well.
Well, and it was a very practical side. Our organic
Sure.
our organic chapters, the practical part of having an organic food group was meeting regularly to talk shop, but also meeting regularly to plan our once a year inspection, helping each other get our applications correct. For 10 years, we would meet either at the business or here at our farm, and we would have 10 or 20 organic farmers quietly reading each other's applications and circling things. And by the end of the night, 4 and 5 hour long nights, we'd help correct each other. We'd put questions like, what do you mean by this? Can you flesh that out a little bit more? And so our meetings were less activism really, and more the practical nuts and bolts of organic food certification. You apply, you answer your questions about crops that you're growing, techniques that you're using, things that you're applying, or processes that you're doing to process food, and you present that as clear as you can so the inspection can go as smoothly as possible. And you, as a group of people, we did that as a group. So that's really what our chapters were about, was those nuts and bolts. The agency would send an inspector, and just to show how it's changed, the agency would send an inspector, and if we had, say, 10 or 12 farmers that get inspected, we would say, which one of you guys is willing, or gals is willing to let the inspector stay overnight? Can you feed them dinner or breakfast? Because, during the day, they're going to be busy. And now you can offer them water, but inspectors today will never stay at anybody's home overnight. They will never accept a meal to create the appearance, to make sure that there's no appearance of favoritism, because that good home-cooked meal made you forget about something that you should have noticed. But that's how we organized our certification in those days, and that's why when a consumer buys something with that seal on it, these are the steps that had to be taken to get to that seal. So that's really what we did. But of course we would encourage people to write letters, and we would write letters as a group and things like that. But it was the nuts and bolts of inspection. That's why we got together as people, because early on, certified organic farming was, I want consumers, for the vast majority of the times, to know that it's done different and better and cleaner, and that's justification for the extra work and the extra money that they may pay for something that's certified organic as opposed to not.
I can't remember the first time I came across Frankferd Farms products. I'm pretty sure it was probably buckwheat pancake mix.
Probably.
Pretty sure. And probably at the co-op. But like you said, then like we were talking, this past couple decades has been pretty interesting and pretty rough on the organic industry, with the larger corporate entities coming into the arena. So how has that had an effect on your products?
Oh, it's been really challenging. One of the things that happens when a successful organic food business gets bought out by a bigger concern, it could be an organic concern, it could be not an organic concern. Let's take Muir Glen and Cascadian Foods. They formed together they bought each other, or there was some kind of a shared partnership, and they became Small Planet Foods. They didn't raise their minimum. For a distributor, that's the practical thing that happens. If a bigger company buys a smaller company out, the minimums, the terms of doing business change, and they get bigger. They're looking to deal with bigger customers, not smaller customers. So when General Mills bought Muir Glen, Small Planet out, bought Muir Glen and Cascadian out, they went from having a 5 or 10,000 pound minimum to a tractor trailer minimum. And that meant that we could not sell their products.
5 or 10,000 pounds is less than a tractor trailer.
Yeah, tractor trailer would be 40,000 pounds. 5 or
Gotcha.
10,000 pounds might be 4 to 5 pallets. A tractor trailer is 20 pallets. That's an increase in the space you have to warehouse it, and the money you need to have to be able to buy that much, in the hopes that you can sell it within reasonable dating before it goes out of date. I remember Betty and Tara pulling me away from these two fresh-faced young representatives of Muir Glen at a booth, as I just was beginning to tell them how I really felt about them being owned by General Mills, and how we sold so much of that product and couldn't get it anymore. And that forced us to find other companies that sold basics. Everybody's pantry has tomato sauce and, chopped tomatoes, stewed tomatoes. Everybody has that. And now, a 5% of our warehouse just evaporated. We didn't have that product, and we had to find it, and I wanted to tell them how I felt about that, and Betty and Tara pulled me away and wisely put a cold bucket of water on my head, and these poor people there that were representing the company at this trade show, they didn't know, or they didn't understand, but
They're paid to be cheery and interact with people.
right, and they didn't know that we weren't a
Wreck
big
their
company
day.
that wasn't going to buy a truckload of product from them every time we called them up. It's a two-edged sword, though, because what happens then is that smaller players find room. All of a sudden, you can't buy Muir Glen. So we had to look for a company, and we found a company. We found several companies. Eden was always a small-scale canner of those things. Hell, Walnut Acres was. Then we found Natural Value, which is just a sales office that goes to co-packers. We sell their pretty good tomato sauce, but it's made in Pennsylvania. We pick it up. It's made down near Altoona. So you're a company, now you have room. Okay, Muir Glen's only sold by the biggest customers. Did we have room to find somebody that can make something similar on a smaller scale and maybe price compete? But that forces us to do work that we weren't used to doing. It was like we had these companies, we bought from them, it's all regular, and then as the industry began to consolidate, and Cornucopia has a really good chart showing who's been bought out by whom. And when that happens too, sometimes the product quality is compromised, the selection's narrowed, and the minimums go up. And so it's harder to deal with natural food companies, organic food processors, once they've been bought out by a large conventional conglomeration. Just guarantee that's going to happen. Tom's was bought out by, I think, Colgate. And one of the terms of the agreement was that they would at least keep the standards of the quality of the products. We were distributors of that. They told us to go away. When Seventh Generation, we were distributors of that. It was a large-scale home cleaning company. When they were bought out, they told us to go away. So these things the last 20 years have been examples of that. And so it forces us to look elsewhere, lose business while we're doing that, though. But it also gives some impetus and some possibility for companies to make a new line of products to address that. The big or big, we're going to add our own look to it and try to sell a similar product and start appealing to the smaller markets before maybe we get picked up and get big ourselves. We've been playing catch up for 10 or 15 years, and we are still doing it. And it's, I think I'd mentioned before about how when businesses go through both generational transitions and market transitions, they can make it or break it. I mean, and those are things that people in our industry are looking at all the time, including us. And we think we're going to come out ahead on this. But compared to the first 20 years of our business, where that wasn't even, you couldn't have find new customers. I can't keep up with the ones that are calling me. Now it's a matter of how much, social media presence do we have? Can we find a way of seeing if it does any good at all? And even if it doesn't bring us new customers, it reminds people that we exist. And this is all a whole new aspect of the business that we didn't have to do, and then therefore playing catch up on now. And we're doing it. We think we're doing it right and okay, and look to do it better. But these are all the things these are some of the challenges we have: consolidation and getting people to remember. Like they have all these great home delivery food services. We've been doing it for 38 years, but people don't hear about us. One of the ways that we got behind the 8 ball was our deep respect for East End Co-op, which was our biggest customer for a decade. But even things like that change. There was a time when East End Co-op lost its slightly larger supplier. We were a big supplier to them. There was one larger, and that company got bought out by what now has become United Natural Foods, Inc., UNFI. It was the Federation of Ohio River Co-ops. Their shelves were bare because the warehouse that they bought more than from us went down, shut down, closed up, inventory was sent elsewhere. We kind of saved them once. But 2 generations, 3 or 4 generations of managers since then, we don't get any credit for that. We don't get any loyalty for that. As soon as a manager or a buyer changes, you have it's a whole new game. And these are some of the things, these are the hard lessons that we've been learning over these years, that it's good that we did what we did. It was good for our business to help them out. And it was good for them because they're still there. But it's not remembered 15 years later, 20 years later. Interestingly, the gentleman that ran that warehouse was my organic inspector. At our warehouse, our food warehouse is inspected by PCO, and our farm and flour mill here are inspected by OCIA. And he was the guy that ran that company when they got bought out and shut down. And he was like my rival, like, oh, they're bigger than us, but we're going to try hard to, compete with them. And then he came inspecting us. It's kind of an ironic moment, but I applaud his commitment to the industry. I mean, he's still in it. Organic inspectors are so important. Without them, you can't have these good things. The IOIA, the International Organic Inspection Agency, is actually now trying to have college-level classes for what they do. And I think I can see why. They have to learn, if you want to be an animal inspector, you have to have almost a degree in animal husbandry. If you're going to be inspecting crops, you almost have to have an agronomic degree. And if you are inspecting a processor, you almost have to have a food processing chemical engineering degree. And so, for somebody to stay in the industry and do that, I tip my hat to him. But along with all that has come fraud. And the fraud, which hurts consumers' confidence, has to be addressed. And so the rules starting in about a month from now are going to be harder, tougher, more paperwork, more work for everybody's inspection. Although the rules were pointed towards international brokers and international trade, and even warehouses that would unload a container of, say, organic rice from India and then sell it to a distributor in America. But the organic chain of custody kind of breaks down when that happens unless the warehouse itself is certified organic, which means they have to comply with managing product in by the number, product out by the number, and they also have to manage how they treat the product in their warehouse, what they do for pesticides and bugs and things like that. And it will affect everybody a little, and it'll affect the big players a lot. We actually see a marketing opportunity. We compete with some big warehouses that sell organic commodities, but they're not going to get certified. They've already told us that. And they're going to sell organic stuff, and the organic chain is going to break down right there with them.
So this is organic regulation for, internationally for?
Well, even within America, there's fraud.
I'm curious because I know that the EU has stricter rules on and stricter guidelines for all kinds of food stuff than the U.S. does. So I'm just curious if this organic certification is an international thing that's going to change trade.
Yes, it's going to change trade. It's going to make it better ultimately, but it's going to make it harder
for the consumer.
It's going to make it harder for the consumer and better for the consumer. Harder because prices are going to go up because the whole chain of custody from farm to table is going to get more complicated. But it should be because of the possibility and the actual existence of fraud, both done internationally and both done in America. The worst case was a $250 million fraud by a dude in Missouri. He was a good church-going man, and he was well known to grow his organic farm of hundreds of acres to be bigger and bigger, but he committed $250 million worth of organic fraud, where he took conventional products, relabeled them as organic, had a team of people doing it, had a gambling problem, and then took his life before he was to serve his long prison sentence for it. He took some of that extra money he made and had girlfriends in Las Vegas,
Oh my God.
where he went and gambled. So in his little a small town where he was a small town hero. He
Yeah.
put that town on the map, and he did it by doing something different and doing it well.
But he was shady.
But he was shady, and so when you have fraud like that, you have to tighten that up. It's sad and necessary that more laws are created to address the sins of a very few.
Yeah.
But all of us have to bear those sins in the form of regulation that's proper and cumbersome.
Unless we want to completely be self-sustaining, which is just not necessarily possible.
No, there was a speaker at Possum that I recall she was a leader in the homeschool movement. And I really thought it was really interesting that they brought her for a speaker. And her whole point of her speech was, as members of your communities, as homemakers, may we all become more creators and less consumers. And in any given community, you may have, no green thumbs. You couldn't grow something. If somebody handed it to you living, you'll kill it. But maybe you're a musician and you can play at the local pub or the local 4th of July parade or something like that. Or maybe you're an artist, or maybe you're a damn good carpenter who can help people. But her point of her whole speech was that our society will be better when all of us can embrace the creative sides of ourselves in whatever way we can create and diminish somewhat the consumer side. That doesn't mean that you won't consume something that you can't make or grow from somebody that does it. But her point was it would make a much more wholesome society. It would slow trade. It would slow the whole aspect of consumerism and give people opportunity to see what they can do in the world of creating something instead of consuming it.
It's finding your value
Right.
in the world.
Right.
Not necessarily like, your job or whatever, but
Right.
finding that the value that you bring to a community. Yeah,
Right.
I love
Maybe
that.
starting with your family and then to a community. Betty and I are honored and humbled that we have been making a living doing this for as long as we have, really. It's been 40 years that we have been our own bosses, and we're doing things that we don't lose sleep at night once over the quality of what we do or the nature of what we do. So we're blessed that way. But even if you were, an accountant for a big city company, but you could grow shiitakes like nothing. Embrace that creative side of you and share it as best you can on whatever level you can to enrich your, starting with your family, but enrich your neighborhood, your community. And I really was touched by that. And I think about that often in terms of what I consume and what I can make and whether I should try to fix or build something or pay somebody to do it, or whether I even want to eat dinner or not, or like grab the cookbook, let's see what we can do, or let's go down and get a couple of those odd ingredients and let's make something fun and different. And I think that her point was really well taken, and the PASA conference was a really good place to hear that. And yet she came from the world of homeschooling. So I thought that's a lesson that stuck with me, and
it seems along the same lines to me. Does it seem?
It is,
Okay.
because
All right.
it really is. But her talk was to expand that. Because here she was talking to a farming community, but in a sense, her creativity was maybe in homeschooling, and she had created good curricula for kids, and I think they did create a home-based business in the same sense that we did, that allowed them to be better homeschool parents and to push their kids to learn the lessons of what it takes to run a small business at home as life lessons that you would take even if you work anywhere else. There are good lessons there, and the value of finishing something, the value of sticking to it no matter what, et cetera, et cetera. And so even though the conference is about food, she was a brilliant addition to the concept of making things yourself, which, growing food and cooking it is all that. But I remember that, and I have to give a shout out to PASA for being that broad-minded to include somebody who came to that world from a different place, and that inspired me for 20 years, or caused me to think and caused me to appreciate that point that she made. I have to say something good about PASA. I served on the board before they went through a big transition, and I'm just so glad that there are organizations that will look for young people or look for new people and try to cultivate, figuratively and literally, their growth as food raisers.
Yeah, I love PASA. And I'm really glad that I went to the conference.
I'm glad too, and I hope that maybe in some way we used to be, and again, that's the transition of people that are the managers. Lauren Smith was the general, regardless of who was the president of the board. Lauren Smith was the heart and soul of PASA for years. And when she moved on, I think she did go to the Walnut Acres Foundation and played a key role in that for a number of years after PASA. The people that were close to the organization because of her maybe took a step back. Like, it's really important in the world of business and in the world of relationships to transition to the next person that's doing something in a world that you're related to, that you commerce with, or that you work with. And that next manager is just as important to talk to them as it was to talk to the old one. And you lose business by not doing that. We were at Lancaster and saw a bakery that had been a customer of ours, a regular customer of ours, and had fallen off the radar. And we'd sent them a couple catalogs, but they changed ownership twice, the young lady that was running their stand there. And we're working to get them back as a customer. But when the owner sold to somebody else and didn't bother to say where they got their products from, we lost a customer, and a good one. But we'll get them back.
Speaking in terms of southwestern Pennsylvania and the products that you see, where do you see some opportunity? Where do you see opportunity? Where are the gaps?
I think some of the problems that we had when we first started being like an organic organization, an organic farming chapter, there's never enough organic farmers. There's always more demand than, and these are broad, these are 30,000 foot observations. There's never enough organic farmers, and the problems then are the same problems now. Farmland. Pennsylvania addresses that, and Pennsylvania, really, to their credit, is doing what they can. But you don't want to lose farmland lost as farmland never recovered. One of the challenges is small and medium scale processing. Farmers starting out that want to have some desire to grow to some slightly larger scale need to have businesses that they can sell their materials to that are also thinking along the same way. So you may have big farms, big successful organic farms selling to big organic processors, but you don't have the processing to take smaller organic farms or even smaller conventional farms and get their products value added and staying in the area.
So what kind of processing?
Well, why isn't there, this area is known for growing potatoes, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. Why isn't there a potato chip factory here? Why does Lancaster have all the pretzel factories? The wheat that you grow for pretzels can be grown here. Why isn't there a pretzel factory here? Why did the world's largest mushroom mine close here? Well, I know why they closed, but why isn't there another mushroom mine? Why is it all the mushroom production in eastern PA? It's the mushroom capital of the world. Western PA had the largest mushroom mine in the world. They had union jobs working it. So you kind of figure what happened. Cheap labor put them out of business, and maybe some mismanagement. But to make your community, to make your region more whole and independent and self-sufficient, you need to have small and medium-sized processing to go with small and medium-sized farms. So you have to encourage the keeping and the growth of farmland. You have to encourage the opportunity for processing to be something you can add, which creates jobs, keeps the money. The money multiplies itself when it stays in the area, because the big are always going to buy the big, and that's always going to happen. So that's really small and medium-sized farming and processing is one of the, and diversity in that. Diversity in the kinds of things that are raised, kinds of things that are processed, is what this area needs to grow the food economy. Pennsylvania has an outsized amount of food creativity. When we were in Lancaster, we were really impressed with the amount of variety of food there that was offered to the consumer in the form of restaurants. Pittsburgh has it too. And keeping that on the map and encouraging and fostering that growth trickles down to the farmer who says, oh, I've got a place that'll pay me a little bit more, maybe feature me on their menu, and a place that I can begin a binding relationship with. They depend on me. The Who Cooks For You farm has relationships like that, for example. And we need to keep what we have and grow what we don't in the small and medium-sized levels of raising food and processing food and presenting the consumers, Western Pennsylvania products.
Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you want to make sure
That's a good question.
people know about farms? Or, whatever you got on your mind.
A farmer friend of ours that we don't buy his eggs anymore. He stopped. Once his kids got old enough to not clean the eggs and went off to college, he doesn't sell eggs anymore. He's an ag teacher. And I guess what I want to have, something that is on my mind, and it's on my mind a lot, as an ag teacher, he's a teacher by day and a farmer by not day, is there has to be a concerted effort. This is meant to address some of the urban and rural divide, which culturally is big when you look at it, politically and culturally. We need to bring the country to the city and bring the city to the country so that there's a deeper appreciation. And a big part of the country is you raise food there. Now, there's the growth of urban agriculture is great and good. And that comes with that, the necessary understanding and appreciation of country agriculture. But on a broader theme, the appreciation for food being raised by people that live in these housing plans, even if they never want to grow anything and have never been to a farm market, somehow we have to teach those people to appreciate the work, the quality, the diversity, and the fun of good food. That's self-serving in the sense that they will then maybe go to a farm market, even if they never grow a thing, and appreciate a local farmer whose land is not turning into a development. And they will then go to restaurants that are unique and say, oh, I tried a recipe at home. I did okay. I'm going to try your version of it because I went to a farm market and I learned about food and I want to explore that and learn more about it. We eat every day. So I think on a really 35,000 foot view that the understanding of eaters to the intricacies, the hard work, and the detail about the food that lands on their plate needs to somehow be taught. And even if it's not teaching farming in school, this guy's, going back to this farmer, he's a VOAG teacher, and he's seeing some growth, but he's out in the country. An appreciation for food, farming, and rural farming life that could lead to new consumers and deeper appreciation of suburban and urban people. That needs addressed. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. We, on social media, like in our Middlesex Township group, there is discussion. These people that are buying this land don't understand that and it's not, if they're buying 1 acre of a 100-acre farm, are they really destroying the farm? It was the farmer who saw no choice. It was the society that says, we don't appreciate farming. We appreciate, the Elon Musks, the Steve Jobs of this world, the whomevers. These are our icons, not the person who has raised a family, built a business. That's a social problem, and it's not the fault of the person that buys that acre. A farmer should stand on equal footing. A full-time farmer should stand on equal footing with an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. They simply are doing something as important and as intricate as those people are too. So it's society's failing. And when we talk to these people, and old-timers here that aren't farmers but don't want to see the developments, get nasty with people that are in the developments, they say, hey, we didn't sell them. We bought our little corner of this. This is our chance to come out to the country. Oh, you're ruining it for us. We watch those conversations. And I think that really the solution is to educate people about food and farming and to learn to appreciate the food on their plate. Because that inherently means appreciating the land that it was raised on, the work that was done, and then to politically do what Pennsylvania's doing the best job in the country. And that's a sad statement to realize that they're doing it well. Other states aren't doing it much, and Pennsylvania could save more farmland so much better if they could. Our township is watching development. The township next door created a tax stream to match the money from the county and the state, so that if you're a 50-acre farmer or just a hobby farmer, but you want to sell out, you need that money to move. You could sell your development rights, take that money, then you can sell your farm, but that 50 acres will never be subdivided. We're looking to do that with our property, some of our property, and to change the laws about the rest of our property. The 30 acres down the road that's not contiguous with this, we can't have that done. The 50 acres we have here, that can be done. Why shouldn't our land that I can see from here also be able to be preserved? So tweaking of these rules to make it possible to save this open space, but people have to get an appreciation of that. There should be a farming class in every urban and suburban school, and if it does nothing more, it can be integrated into growing something, cooking it, and preserving it. And you just created new creators and consumers of the industry that we're in, but appreciators of the land. Even if they still want their 1 acre house and want to mow that lawn that they'll never put a garden in, they might go to the farm market. They might buy a side of beef from a local farmer. They'll buy their eggs somewhere else, and they'll appreciate that. And they'll seek out restaurants, which will stimulate new restaurants. And they'll look for interesting foods that are local or regional. Oh, I know that guy that grows potato chips from his farm. Hell yeah, we all eat potato chips. Those kinds of things will follow from that. Where does it start? There's a number of things you can do that aren't being done, and that is the appreciation of food, the raising, growing, and cooking and consuming of it.
T.Lyle, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
I appreciate the opportunity because I think that people need to hear this. And I think that the people that need to hear it aren't just the ones that already understand this. We need to foster these conversations in cities and in the countryside. Country people are afraid of the cities. They think they're rife with crime and they're bad places to go, even if there might be culture there that they would benefit from. Sports, museums, art, history, performances that would enrich their lives, but they're afraid of the cities. City people don't understand how people in the country live. These are broad generalizations. Bridging that gulf and creating an appreciation for both lifestyles, only good could come from that. And when you can do it with some history at your back, then you can speak from at least a place of experience and not conjecture.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Shelley.
Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon. Everyone
With Bowl and Spoon is written, produced and hosted by Shelley Danko Day. Original theme song was written and performed by Paul LeBreeze and friends. You can listen to With Bowl and Spoon wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review and share. Follow us and send us questions or messages on Facebook and Instagram at With Bowl and Spoon. Thanks for listening.
and spoon.